Every day as a small business owner feels like solving a puzzle. One moment you're cruising along, and the next, there's a shipping snag that has you scrambling. But here's a surprise you will like. With Progressive, small business owners save 13% on their commercial auto insurance when they pay in full. So go ahead, surprise yourself. Get a quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Discounts not available in all states or situations.
When I talk about holding up our end of the relationship, it's like, it's easier now not to have to engage. So we can move through the world with GPS and you don't necessarily have to memorize all the turns in your hometown, which is, that's not bad, but it's a way that you're not having to engage with the space. Another huge one is just the phone, right? Or the screen or whatever. So like anytime we're looking at this like two-dimensional thing that's designed to like steal our attention, we're not having this fully immersive, three-dimensional and multi-sensory experience that just no phone or AI or anything is ever going to be able to provide.
That was Leidy Klotz on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive, and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hey, listeners, just a super quick reminder that you can listen to the podcast ad-free by supporting us on Patreon for just $5 a month. Or you can support the podcast with a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee. Thank you to everyone who's already supporting us. Be sure to stay tuned to the end of the episode for our co-host's discussion of today's interview.
Today, I'm so excited to welcome back a colleague who was on the show a few years ago for his book, Subtract, and who I've since adopted as my pal because, well, he's awesome and was kind enough not to resist. Leidy Klotz is a professor at the University of Virginia whose research spans physical design and behavioral science, an intersection which we'll delve deeply into today. Before he was a professor, he designed schools in New Jersey, and before that, he played professional soccer, which tells you he's someone who's not afraid to cross a lane or two. His first book, Subtract, explores the idea that we're systematically biased toward adding rather than removing and what we lose because of it. And it's a terrific read. His new book is incredible. It's called In a Good Place: How the Spaces Where We Live, Work, and Play Can Help Us Thrive. And it explores how the spaces we inhabit are constantly shaping how we think, feel, and connect, usually without our awareness. It's also a deeply personal book whose emotional impact is hard to convey, but I hope we'll try today. Leidy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Yael. And I've adopted you as a friend too. You can't just like singularly do that. So the feeling is mutual.
Yay, it's mutual. All right. So before we dive in, I have to tell you, I read this book and I couldn't stop thinking about it and talking about it. But I also felt personally called out because I am somebody who loves a good audiobook or music on my runs. It's like my happy place. But I also admit it really does cause me not to notice my physical space, which you talk a lot about. So I wanted to start off with a question, because I know you're a runner too. Do you run with music, with podcasts, or are you just out there being in space?
I'm out there in space. But I think I know where this is going, and I don't think what you're doing is wrong.
Oh, good. But given that you are somebody who probably consumes a lot of books and media, and I know that you're into Bruce Springsteen, why are you so committed to your runs that are more in your physical space?
I spend a lot of time in head. So part of it is that, right? It's like in terms of thinking, productivity, like I know that the run is a great time for new to come into my brain, right? So if I'm reading when I'm running, that's not going to happen. Or like listening to something when I'm running, that's less likely to happen. Whereas if I'm just running, that is going to happen. But then also, I think getting the connection to the surroundings that running provides, right? And being able to, just pay attention to the things that are happening around you and take those in. And those are very important from a productivity standpoint in terms of just like keeping us healthy, right? Happy and healthy by being engaged with your surroundings. But first and foremost, I think it would be to kind of keep the mental load lower, and then also so that I can experience some of the benefits of actually running.
Yeah. And you make this point, but like when we're in a space but not paying attention to it, we're not getting the benefits of that space. And we'll talk a lot more about that. But let's sort of back up and just explore a little bit this intersection that you study. So you study the intersection between physical design and behavioral science. And a lot of people's first reaction is, wait, those two things intersect? So orient us. Why should people listening to a psychology podcast care about physical spaces?
There's this just artificial split between minds and matter, right? And so much of what happens in our inner world is shaped by what our outer world is like. And of course, like one of my favorite quotes is Emerson talks about how that if you look at the outer world, it's kind of flown into shape, obedient to the master ideas reigning in the minds of many, or something to that effect. That sounds like Emerson, right? But the idea being that like if looking around at the world is a good way to see what's going on in people's heads, or collectively see what's going on in people's heads. So, I started coming at this from the engineering and architecture side just by, that's what I majored in college, and that's what my first job was, and that's where I did my PhD. But the more I was looking at the architecture and engineering, you see that there's a lot of physical solutions are oftentimes there, and the thing that is missing is like, okay, there's psychology behind this. There's psychology behind why people feel the way they do, why people design the way they do. And so then I got more interested in the psychology and, learned a lot about that from working with people like you. And then you realize that like kind of the same, I guess it's a blind spot is going in the other direction, right? I think every psychologist would acknowledge that, yeah, the surroundings are kind of important, but in terms of like just, okay, why are they important? What are the things that matter most about our relationship with our surroundings? That's kind of less well understood. So with this book, I was just trying to understand like, okay, there's our inner world and there's outer world. And then there's like this relationship between them. And hopefully in the book was like, okay, how can we help people understand that relationship between them and the most like practical elements to focus on in that relationship between them, because it's a big area.
Yeah, it is a big area, but you make this point that like we rarely think about them together. I loved the image of you in the bookstore or the library and just recognizing that like the behavioral science self-help books are in one part of the bookstore or library, and then the books about our space and how we design a house that is comfortable or a workspace that is supportive of our creativity are in such distinct areas, and we really think about them in separate categories, but really they impact each other in a very fundamental way.
Yeah. And the college campus, right, is also organized this way. It's like engineering's over here, psychology's over there, architecture's over there. And again, we know that things have to be put in different places to kind of keep track of them, but it also prevents the insights that hopefully are in the book.
So you write that spaces are constantly shaping how we think, feel, and interact. What are some of the things that we should know about how our spaces shape our internal experience?
I distilled this down to, I think the most important ones are like these basic emotional or psychological needs that we have, and for agency, for belonging, and for growth. And so if you think about this, my daughter Josie playing at the beach, and any kid playing at the beach, any grown-up playing at the beach is eventually going to be called to like play with the sand, right? And make something in the sand. And so there's agency and like, okay, I can decide how I want to interact with this surrounding. And that makes us feel good. And so that's, building the sandcastle, deciding where to put it, how tall you're going to make it, all of those things. And then there's growth in the doing, right? In the interacting with that physical environment, right? And so, Josie was learning like high level fluid mechanics when she's seeing like, okay, how does the water erode away this castle, right? What kind of water to sand ratio is appropriate for making this stick? How high can I build the spires before they fall down? You're learning and growing, and also learning that like things about your inner self where, okay, I tried, it didn't work, I got frustrated, I kept going, I felt better after I did it. So by interacting with the surroundings, you're growing. So that's the second thing. And then the third one is like belonging or connection, right? And every one of these projects that I've ever seen anyway, it starts with one kid who has an idea, and then the kid realizes they can do more if they get other people to help, right? And so it's like, okay, let's get the cousins and they can build, and we can boss the parents around and make me go down to the ocean and grab buckets of water, like in an infinite loop, trying to keep the moat full. And so that's connection. And that's the beach example, but also like, let's go even farther back to just like, this is how we've evolved as humans, right? Being able to do those things has been the difference between like survival and not, right? So, okay, back at the beginning of civilization, the reason roaming bands of hunter-gatherers came together was to be able to do big things. And it was literally to like build monuments, right? And so these people are coming together to build monuments because more people can do it. And then all of a sudden they're having to stay together to manage the monuments. And then you've got agriculture and figuring out how to work in groups. Like, this is the original way that people connected in some ways beyond themselves. It's the original way to feel agency, which is something that we feel important now in a lot of ways, right? It's like, I need to feel agency at my work. You talked to Jennifer Wallace about mattering, right? I need to feel like I matter. That's incredibly important. And agency originally came from like, okay, can I physically deal with the world around me? Because that's the difference between surviving and not surviving. And when you have these actions that are like beneficial in terms of helping us survive, it would make sense that they would feel good psychologically too, right? So anyway, it's a long answer, but agency, competence, and belonging. And these are the core emotional needs that we have. And they're either kind of fed or starved by our relationship with our physical environment.
I'm so glad that you brought up Jenny Wallace's book, Mattering, because as I was reading her book, I was thinking a lot about your book. And when I was reading your book, I was thinking a lot about her book. So I love what you're saying about how our relationship to our physical space and our desire to kind of shape it has then shaped us, right? So if we come together to build a monument and then to sustain it, we have to have more of a social connection and community to collaborate with. It was probably a bidirectional. All evolutionary stories are just so stories, but like it was probably a bidirectional evolutionary shaping of us shaping our environment and then the environment shaping us, the physical space shaping us. But she talks a lot in her book, and you talk in your book about how physical spaces can connect us or disconnect us. And I wonder if you can just share some thoughts you have about that. Like, in what way do spaces disconnect us, especially, thinking about like our modern landscape?
Obviously, there's the physical elements of connection, right? And so if like people are in two different offices, they're less likely to interact than if they're at the same table. But that can go either way, right? You can put two people at a table and they're less likely to connect because it's so freaking awkward. And like, I just want to do my work, like leave me alone. And if I could have a quiet place, I would come out and talk to you when I felt like it. And that's why like every 10 years, there's a new, this is how the workplace should be designed article in the New Yorker or wherever about like open offices is good. No, closed office is good. No, open office. So it's really about like, do people have the ability to kind of shape the space and use it how they want to, and then they feel like they can connect.
That's sort of making the point that the agency that we have is actually associated with the connection that we have, that when we have more agency, we're actually better able to connect. And I love this point too, that there's not a one size fits all approach for any one person, let alone for all people.
And I guess a more direct answer to the connection is like thinking there's the physical connection, right? But what you are trying to do with another person is usually have like a cognitive connection, right? And so like, how can you set the space up so that is able to happen? It's hard to connect with somebody. And if they're distracted by the space for whatever reason, I mean, it could be, my house is an example. If there's like boxer briefs and shin guards strewn around, then people are going to be like, what's going on here? Before they're like, okay, let's have a conversation with Leidy. But the same thing could happen with a really nice, well-designed space. You go in and you're like, wow, this person's really got their act together. And holy cow, that's an expensive painting. And like, wow, where is this thing from? And am I allowed to sit here? And all that time you're thinking about the space, you're not connecting with the person. So trying to figure out how to kind of reduce the cognitive load of the space on your guest, if you're the host, definitely helpful.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about this article that I read towards the beginning of the pandemic. Somebody wrote an article about being trapped at home with their spouse and just feeling super disconnected. It's like when you're around the person all the time, but so stressed out and needing some private time and needing to just have less of the cognitive load, it can actually feel really disconnecting, even if you're physically right beside the person 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. And I also think like that connection, I think Jenny talked about this with you too, which is like just like the way our lives are arranged now, we have like this more and more kind of freedom to arrange them how we want to, if we're lucky. And yet what has been taken away from that are some of these kind of connections that would happen just because we're in the same spaces. So I think it's good overall, but it does mean you've got to be more intentional about like, okay, now is a time where I'm feeling like I just want some serendipitous interactions and I need to go to a place where that can happen, or I need to set up my front porch so that that's more likely to happen in my neighborhood.
So you also write that we need to hold up our end of the relationship with our spaces, which I think is a part of what you're saying. Like when you're hosting and your place is a mess and it might be distracting, or if it's overly ostentatious, maybe that feels stressful for your guests. And so to think about your relationship with this space. But I am curious, what do you mean by being in relationship with space? Like, how do you define that and explain it to somebody in terms of how to do that skillfully?
We shape our spaces and our spaces shape us. I think everybody recognizes that. I think when I talk about holding up our end of the relationship, it's like, it's easier now not to have to engage. So we can move through the world with GPS and you don't necessarily have to memorize all the turns in your hometown, which is, I mean, that's not bad, but it's a way that you're not having to engage with the space. Same with, air conditioning and heating and lighting controls, all of these things that get automated about our surroundings. And it's one more opportunity lost where maybe we would have to like open a window and realize how the air flows through, or realize that we can like turn the light off and on. And those are like, I know they're simple things, but that's the definition of agency, right? Like I'm uncomfortable. I'm going to change the space and make myself comfortable. And as those things go away, that's our end of the relationship, right? It's like, how are we paying attention to our spaces? And it's not necessarily for the space, it's for us. It's going to make us feel better if we do it. But that's the part of the relationship where I feel like we're losing it some. And then of course, those are spatial things, but another huge one is just the phone, right? Or the screen or whatever. So like anytime we're looking at this like 2-dimensional thing that's designed to like steal our attention, we're not having this fully immersive 3-dimensional and multi-sensory experience that just no phone or AI or anything is ever going to be able to provide.
I think that you're saying something so important, and it's just such a slippery slope, because being in those 2-dimensional spaces, delegating out, finding our way through a new neighborhood, pressing an app to deliver our food rather than go get it is just so easy. And there's something so appealing about that we default into it. And so I think that really does insidiously hijack our motivation to hold up our end of the relationship with our spaces, because it feels easier to delegate it out.
I mean, there are obvious things where like, okay, maybe some family goes on a hike every week and you're like, well, obviously that's not something that we're going to replace with a screen, because we're like going out into the world. And that one's kind of clear cut, that like that interaction with our surroundings is doing something that is. And then there's things that, I haven't gone to the grocery store since I found Instacart, and I'm like, I'm fine never to go again. But that's, I mean, some people like it, but for me, that's great. I don't need to go into that space again. I don't feel like I'm.
You don't need to hold up your end of the relationship with the supermarket.
Right. Yeah. But I think when it comes to like, are we like just like mindlessly going to the same spot in our house every day, to the same, like mindlessly wandering to our office and never like seeing what other like kind of common areas there are in the workplace, or, mindlessly navigating around our city and not ever going on a street that has like all this stuff that we would think is cool and we would grow because we learn how to deal with another space. So I don't have a magic answer to where to draw the line, but I think if we could at least recognize that there is a huge value in that relationship and picking and choosing when we want to outsource it and when we want to keep it.
Yeah. Be more deliberate about asking ourselves, like, is this a wise trade-off for me? Or am I giving something up that that would cause me to lose out on something in my physical space that would be beneficial for me.
Right. We haven't really touched on it yet, but like the whole idea of habituation, if we were paying attention to everything about our space all the time, we'd never be able to think about anything else.
You gave this really good story that I really related to, where you asked a student to meet you in front of some building that had these very notable features to it. And she was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I do that all the time because I'm so absorbed in my own mind or my audiobook. And on the one hand, I think that's fine. On the other hand, I do think that sometimes we're really mindlessly trading away things without thinking about losing our awareness of where we are in the world.
Yeah. I mean, in the classic like psychology study, they looked for like asking people in offices if they knew where the fire extinguisher was. And nobody knew, even after being in the offices. And that's like, if there's one thing that it would be good to know where it is.
And they're painted bright red, so you notice them.
They're designed to be noticeable.
I think that is a consequence of being so immersed in our two-dimensional screens and being habituated to our surroundings. And there is something, I think, you have a really nice tip, space before screen, of choosing to deliberately tune into your space.
Yeah, the screen can work as a cue, right? Because if you find yourself looking at a screen, the first thing to do is say, well, have I like taken in this space? And are there things about this space that I would appreciate or that I should notice? Or what do I know about where I am? And I think that's a really good way to, work with the reality that we have these screens. They can do really good things, and use that as a cue to then re-engage with our physical surroundings.
Truckers aren't just moving goods. They're making sure bakers get their chocolate chips and hotels get their tiny soaps. But truckers can't do this if they're not on the road. That's why Progressive has over 360 heavy truck employees to help truckers stay on time and on track. Quote truck insurance today in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates.
Ever notice how life's best stories don't happen in your living room? They happen on the open road, out on the water, or parked under the stars. At Progressive, they get that you want to focus on the experience, not worry about the what-ifs. That's why they offer quality insurance designed for your ride, whether that's a boat, RV, or motorcycle. Adventure with confidence. Visit Progressive.com and see how easy it is to protect your favorite way to get away. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in D.C. Prices vary based on how you buy.
So people have different preferences about their space. I think space needs are truly idiosyncratic. Some people prefer solitary versus social, cluttered versus clean, spacious versus cozy. So I have a couples question for you as a relationship psychologist. What happens when two people who share a space have fundamentally different needs? The partner who needs visual quiet and the one who thinks better surrounded by organized chaos. And actually, before you answer that, do most people even know what they need from a space?
I think that's a good question. I mean, obviously, there's the field of environmental psychology, which like if you're a psychologist or if you're someone like me, you've been familiar with. And so we do think about like organized chaos and visual clutter. But I think there's a decent number of people who don't know what they need from a space, or they think they want something and actually want something else. But I would say all of these go back to the like agency, growth, and connection, right? Can we meet those needs for both people? And you know more about this than I do. And, people have different levels of those needs even, but those are needs that pretty much everybody shares. So I don't know, maybe it's like a version of what's that bed that you can adjust both sides?
Yeah. I don't know what it's called, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Sleep number.
Yeah.
Right? This is a plug for, yeah. But so
you would be a good spokesperson for that.
So people, and I think it's as much about the fact that the bed actually changes as it is about the fact that people have control over it, right? One of the crazy things I found when researching for the book is that if you have more control, your comfort range increases, right? So like if you can control the lighting, the level of lighting that you're satisfied with, the range of that goes up, which makes sense in the psychological sense, but it's really fascinating.
That reminds me of research that shows that when you feel understood or connected to other people, your pain tolerance goes up. Your ability to stand cold or shock goes up.
Yeah.
I want to ask one more question about decisions about space, because I do think it kind of taps into this like uncertainty and the meaning that is behind it. And so we feel a lot of pressure and we're not necessarily very strategic, but you have a lot of really good advice that you base in like office design. And so I think most people are familiar that, there was this trend towards open floor plan for more creativity, but that's a blunt instrument for creating spaces that are workable for a lot of people in a lot of different situations. And you talk about one business, I think it was a business or a company that had this really creative strategy that kind of fits into some recommendations that you make for the number of choice points that you offer people when it comes to their space so that they have a bit of agency, but that the agency doesn't feel cripplingly overwhelming.
Right. I mean, that's the other thing from psychology, right? Is like too much choice doesn't actually help us, where if you have all these choices, you feel disappointed in what you eventually select, and it's like overwhelming to think about them. And one of the classic studies of that is people choosing between 6 chocolates and 30 chocolates, right? And so now imagine like all of the potential options with your physical environment. I mean, just infinite number of things that you could do. So there's all this choice. There's a need to narrow it down to a number of choices that make sense. And I think the example in the book was probably just talking about the office system where we know what spaces are available to you, right? I mean, so often we have these assumptions about like where we can go and where we can't go. And this is just like a very clean information in the space itself, but also in some like visual displays that they attach to the spaces where it's like, yeah, this room is available. It's available for meetings. And so people know like how the space can be used, which gives them more ways that they can use it. And it helps them enable their agency. And I think another thing in the workspace is just kind of, or any space is, can you give like these gateway agency experiences? I mean, I think about this with my son Ezra, where if we're doing something in the house, like we just stuck some carpets onto the stairs because they were a little slippery and my parents were coming, and I let Ezra pick the color and I had him help me put them down just because, this will have him feel like, okay, I have more control over the space and I'll like it more. And it's like one of his favorite parts of the house, right? And so you can design that in, that's a kid example, but you can also design that into the workplace, right? It's like, okay, here's the furniture, you guys decide how to set it up, or here's the 2 pieces of furniture that everybody's going to have this the same, and you all have a budget to finish your cubicle or office or whatever, however else you want. But you're not just saying that it's an option, you're like actually creating a situation where people have to have agency in their space.
Yeah, you make this really cool point that like if you have a space that's exactly the same, but it's a prison versus it's a bedroom that you're free to go in and out of, it just feels really different. Like that agency really matters. It connects to the space in a really profound way. So I know this book was written during an incredibly difficult time in your life, and some of the most powerful ideas in the book about transcendence, about what spaces hold for us, about memory, were written in a really profound way. And I just wanted to ask you to kind of share a little bit about different pieces of that, starting with this idea that in our spatial memory, that big emotional moments get tagged with location information. And you draw on some of these personal experiences that reveal just how much spaces can connect to both grief and healing.
Yeah. And it's something in the people I've talked to since writing the book, it definitely resonates. So oversimplifying the neuroscience here, but basically like the networks in our brains that are used to navigate space, because this was something that we've always needed to do. When we then needed to navigate like relationships and like concepts, those same networks were adapted to do so. And this is why like memory champions, when they're trying to memorize something, will tag what they're trying to memorize to spaces. It just helps us remember. So you can reverse engineer that, right? And when you think out, one of the stories in the book is me and my daughter Josephine, like sitting on the boardwalk in Ocean City, New Jersey. And like, I'll never forget that moment. And every sense was being triggered. We were just walking around, she got ice cream and sat in my lap, made me sit right on the boardwalk. And then she wanted to sit in this particular spot because it was like, you could see the people through the boardwalk, but then you could also see the ocean on the other side. And it was also like right underneath this mini golf course that had like a helicopter with gorillas like dancing and singing in it. Not real gorillas, obviously, but, and so she could hear the music. And it was just like, she had like paid attention to all of her senses and forced me to do so. But then like I can feel that moment right now because of the sensory information. And now I do it with my students in classes too. Sometimes they'll be like, what is this field trip? Like, we're literally just, you know, a block away on campus from our regular building and not even at a significant spot. And then I'll use it to like describe this lesson, but also like if there's a chance you remember this in 20 years, it's gotta be because it's a different space. So that's using the space for memory.
So we can use novel experiences in new situations to attach new memories. And I also love how you talked about using our physical space to connect to past memories, being able to kind of make contact with people that we love, who we've lost, or just experiences that were nostalgic, that we can use our physical spaces in a way to connect with them. And I think that can be like a really powerful, way to process loss and still stay connected to people and things that we have lost.
Yeah. And as you know, Josie died on Christmas in 2023, and it was just completely unexpected. It was basically one moment she's there and one moment she's not. And, in the processing of that and writing this book about space, figuring out like, okay, what are the ways that you can spread her spirit through like the stories, but also through spaces. And so my friend Kelly Leonard, who he works at Second City and just a great guy. And he lost his daughter, Nora, when she was 17, I think, maybe. And I knew about that when Josie died. And I was like, oh, what did Kelly do? And one of the things that they did with Nora was they created like the Sun and Moon Park for her at her school in Chicago. And basically the idea was that, okay, there's a place to remember her, but it's also basically a playground next to the school. And it's a combination of a remembrance and a place to play. So it's kind of reframing this idea of like death needing to be hidden away, but also like spreading the things that Nora loved. And so I had that in my mind. It's like, is there something similar we can do with Josie? And one of my favorite Josie stories that just so perfectly encapsulated who she was. We'd always walk between my house and a pond on campus to either go fishing or like just throw rocks in or whatever. The journey was the most important part. And she would always want to go different ways. And so one day we're walking through this house that the university now owns, but it's just an old house. And so we're walking outside past the house. And so we walked, up the lawn, and there was some English ivy. And then we got onto a path that went between the house and the road. And on this path, the homeowner had a marble block where they had etched their name. So it said like Volino Lambeth or something like that. But of course, Josie's 4 and doesn't know how to read. So she looks at it and she's like, that says Josie's Way. And so, she had to know like the double meaning too, right? That's like a name for a road, and that's just like her way of being in the world. And so, thinking of ways to remember her, we made Josie's Way that's like next to the best playground in town. And it's a trail that meanders through the woods, and which she would have loved. And it's really cool to see the little kids out there now. I was out there last weekend, and there were 2 little, they must have been 4-year-old boys who were out there with their moms. And it had snowed here recently, so like the path was icy going down, but then it was kind of clear once you got at the bottom. So the boys like went down the path really carefully, and the moms didn't want to go down. They stayed at the top and were talking to each other. And then the boys were at the bottom, and the moms were like, all right, I have to come back now. And the boys were like, you guys come down here. And the moms were like, no, we're, come on, time to go. And they said, but walk around, because you can walk all the way around and we can walk up the other side. And I was like, no, you're coming back here. And the boys looked, and one of them was just like, we're not coming. I was like, Josie would have loved that so much, It's like, this is deciding how to be in their world. So it's been it's a nice, like when I go and see that, I remember her, but I also feel like it's kind of like even people who don't know the connection to her, when they're having that action on the path, they're kind of doing, that's her. That's what she would have wanted put into the world. And then I've got graduate students who've made like little Josie's Ways in their backyards with their kids, and, her cousins have made them. So it's cool to see just that idea spread in the same way that kind of stories spread who was here before and like kind of can stay after us. It's the spaces can do a similar thing. And that was our effort at trying to do it.
I thought that was so beautiful. I told my kids about it as well. I think it's really sweet.
Thank you.
Insurance isn't one size fits all. That's why customers have enjoyed Progressive's Name Your Price tool for years now. With the Name Your Price tool, you tell them what you want to pay, and they'll show you options that fit your budget. So whether you're picking out your first policy or just looking for something that works better for you and your family, they make it easy to see your options. Visit Progressive.com. Find a rate that works for you with the Name Your Price tool. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.
As a small business owner, sometimes it feels like no matter how much planning you do, there's always surprises, like an urgent, expensive repair. But here's a surprise you will like. With Progressive, small business owners save 13% on their commercial auto insurance when they pay in full. So enjoy a surprise for once. Get a quote in as little as 8 minutes at progressivecommercial.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Discounts not available in all states or situations.
So I just wanted to close with a quote from your beautiful book. Bridging that gap between our physical and mental worlds is something everyone can manage to great effect. When we do, we gain new agency to make our spaces better, and we find new ways to make ourselves better, because in many ways, these pursuits are one and the same. So thank you for meeting with me. Before I let you go, Leidy, where can people go to find more from you and about your work?
My parents gave me a good Google name, so just LeidyKlotz.com, LeidyKlotz.com. And there's like links to everything from there. And the book's available wherever you get your books.
And we'll link to all of that in our show notes as well. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, listeners, I'm here for the co-host post with Jill Stoddard. And wow, this was such a heartrending conversation for me to have with Leidy, who through the book takes you on that journey of using our spaces in ways that help us to thrive and connect and be more present in the lives that we live. And so I'm curious, Jill, sort of what stuck out in this fairly wide-ranging conversation.
Yeah. Well, I loved this conversation. And I have to say in the beginning, I was like, yes, how are you going to connect behavioral science and like architecture and spaces? And then, of course, by the end, I'm thinking all about family, because he's so vulnerable talking about Josie. And what it really made me think and then rethink is initially when you guys were talking about space and connection and things like that, I got a little anxious and self-conscious, like, oh my gosh, the way my family is in our space, our home, is we have, our house is 4 stories. And my son spends most of his time in our basement, our finished basement. I don't have him like chained down there or anything. I spend most of my time on our main floor. My daughter spends most of her time in her bedroom. And my husband spends most of his time in his office, which is in our attic. And at first I thought, oh no, are we disconnected because we're spending our time so separately in these spaces? But I kind of came around to a different thought toward the end. And it was when you were asking him about relationships and what happens when you have different needs for your space. And it made me really realize that us having these separate places allows us to be in the space that best fits us. So when my son is in the basement, he's loud. He's literally running around. He literally plays video games and is like constantly moving while he's doing that. He is making the biggest mess you've ever seen. Me, I don't know. I'm just normal on the first floor. My daughter, she needs dark. All the shades are down. The lights are off. She likes to be cozy. She likes small space. Like when she chose her bedroom in our last house, she picked the smallest room because she likes cozy. My husband up in his office, it is organized chaos, or he thinks it's organized chaos. I think it's just chaos. And so it really suits each of us and allows us the autonomy to be in the space that fits most. And then we come together at the dinner table. And that's where we connect and we share our day. And that's what it really made me think of. And I had never stopped to even consider this in the past. And so I just loved having this, I don't know, like different perspective on something that I had kind of taken for granted prior to your conversation.
Yeah, it reminds me of Scott Rick, who I know you had on Psychologist Off the Clock when I was on my POTC break. And I actually interviewed him for my newsletter, Relational Riffs, about his book, Tightwads and Spendthrifts. And that episode is 365 for those who are interested in going back. But he has this really interesting study. This is going to sound a little off topic, but I swear it relates. He has this study where he looked at different ways of people keeping accounts within relationships. So, only a joint account, only separate accounts, or a joint and separate accounts. And what he found was that the best setup for relational happiness was the combination that you have one joint account that's entirely transparent, and that you have two smaller accounts that are to the individual's discretion of how they spend it and to do so privately. So it's sort of like this open secret of like, I have my own money, I'm going to spend it, in accordance with our general relationship mores, but also I'm going to have a little bit of privacy and autonomy in how I spend it. And I love that as like a general framework for how to do relationships, that like we should have a lot of openness and shared space, physical space, or shared accounting or shared practices. But there should also be room for us to do what works for us and to do so with some privacy and some permission to kind of be ourselves. And I think that the space allocation that you're describing is so lovely if you have the space to do it, to give people that freedom to kind of keep their space the way it really works for them and makes them happy. And then to have some motivation and maybe even incentive and maybe practices and habits around it of coming into the shared space and compromising and sort of having more of that transparency and shared ideals where you do things that work for the community at large rather than for one individual exclusively.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that parallel. I never would have made that connection. And I remember that conversation with Scott was the rationale for having the sort of opaque account, that's not totally transparent, is because you have different values and you have different things that matter to you. And so you're right, like it really does parallel this conversation really well. And I can see the ways it can parallel with lots of different things beyond space and money.
Well, there's another episode this reminds me of, which is Both And with Marianne Lewis, where we talk about we often sort of drop into this should we be all together or should we be all apart? And is there a way that you can make space for both? And I think that there's really great, if you do not have this space for each member of your family to have their own floor, which is pretty cool, there are many clever ways to do this both and, right? It just requires some thinking and asking the right question, which is how can we each get our individual preferences satisfied, at least to some extent? And how can we create some shared space where we can come together in a way that works well enough for the entire community, however, you define that community. But I do think using our spaces both to kind of nurture ourselves as individuals and to foster connection and shared values and learning and growth together is such a beautiful thing. And I think, figuring out within whatever community you're focused on how to craft that is a really useful practice.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other thing I would take out of it that relates to what you're saying is we also have to show up and pay attention.
Yes. And I do think that it is worth repeating, especially in our physical space, because we're so immersed in the virtual world.
Right.
And I disclose this very openly that I'm often lost in an audiobook or a podcast or my own thoughts, as I'm moving through my day. And I do, if I'm not careful, miss out on many opportunities to connect with where I am physically and with the people that I am there physically with. Yeah. Including just myself, right? It's hard to connect with yourself if you're lost in thought. You don't check in with your body. You don't check in with the beautiful view or, with what is left in your refrigerator, things like that are quite useful and nurturing on many levels from the, straight physiological, you got to feed yourself, but also it's really orienting to say okay, here I am in my house and to sort of be in the physical space, or here I am with this beautiful view, and really to appreciate it and savor it.
Well, I think the appreciation and savoring is so important because our negativity bias really can prevent us from doing that. And I was just doing a sweet spot exercise yesterday. And the example I gave when I was talking about just showing up for these little tiny moments is every time I walk in my office, I look at my light fixture, my chandelier, because I just love it. and I look at the color of my navy blue walls because I just love them. And every time I take a moment to sort of savor how much I love the aesthetic of this space. And I think a lot of times we take that for granted, but it can really give us just a little bit of boost if we do a little more of that appreciating and savoring like you're talking about. And spaces can give that to us.
I love that. And I know that you actually have a practice that you walk through with your clients that helps them to do more of that paying attention to. So I wonder if you can share that with our audience.
Yeah, actually, my next newsletter is devoted entirely to that in total detail. So if people want to hear more about the sweet spot and how to do this, it is my most favorite exercise on the planet. I love it so much. And so I'm on Substack. And so anybody who wants to check that out, just go to 2-Minute Tips for Dr. Jill, and you can find it as my last newsletter.
And we'll also link to it in the show notes for your ease as well. Thank you all for listening, and we hope that you enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.